I'm finding it so hard to adapt my teaching to suit a virtual classroom.
Okay, tell me what the problems are.
Where do I start? I don't feel as though I'm as engaging as I normally would be. I don't feel like I'm able to find ways to be creative, or worry about technology minutely. I worry that the children are distracted, that I'm not as good of a teacher, I'm losing confidence daily. I could go on.
And how's that making you feel generally as a teacher?
I don't feel like I'm just thinking about being a teacher anymore. I feel like there's so much more involved than what I expected, what I thought I was in the role for.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And I do feel for you, because for all of us, this new world has changed in the way that we've got to teach, hasn't it? But we can do it. Let's just try and break down and see if we can get to what, the core, the nub of what's happening to you. So you said that you feel, I've heard a number of issues there, that you feel that you're overwhelmed, tired, and that you're not making the standards or being as creative as a teacher. Is that right?
Absolutely. I feel like I'm getting to a point now where I'm dreading going to work, and that's not me. I love teaching, and I love teaching specifically my class, but I'm starting to not look forward to it anymore.
Oh, that's not good. Okay, can you tell me, how long have you been teaching in this new world and feeling like this?
Well, we've had sort of virtual connections with sort of online portals and things for parents and children of homework as long as I've been teaching, but in this teaching from home and in a new environment, 6 months.
You've done that for 6 months. How long have you been teaching, remind me, in total in the classroom?
7, but it'll be 8 years at the end of this academic year.
Right, so the very first thing to acknowledge is it's an unfair comparison to compare how you were as a teacher in the traditional classroom to how you are now. All right, because the thing that you've got to remember is when you first started teaching, you didn't have everything under your belt. You weren't as confident as you are, 8 years later when you first started teaching, were you? You didn't know how to perhaps be as creative as you do now. And you learnt all of that. How did you learn all of that?
Observing others and seeing what worked and what didn't.
So you made mistakes?
Plenty, yeah.
Okay, but now you've got these techniques under your belt and you're comparing yourself and feeling vulnerable because I'm an experienced teacher, but I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm in a new environment. Okay, accept it, recognise it. Take a moment to think, that's normal. You're not going to be the only teacher that feels like that. All right? So that's the first thing. Second thing, tell me what the purpose of teaching is.
To educate children, to inspire them, to provide them with an environment to feel safe in.
Okay, so has that changed?
No.
So your purpose, your core value hasn't changed, all right? And you're still the same person. Just acknowledge the only thing that's changed is the environment. That's the first thing. And you have been asked to do it in an incredibly short time because presumably when you learnt to teach, before you even went into a classroom, how many years were you in training?
3, 4.
So you've had 3 or 4 years of training and 8 years of teaching. And now you've had 6 months and I've got to be in a virtual world and I've got to know it all now. Of course you're going to feel overwhelmed and vulnerable. Okay, so accept that. But the purpose hasn't changed. What we've got to do is develop a growth mindset. Because all those things that you talked about, they're not the anxiety in them themselves. It's your relationship to the challenges of using new technology, to getting standards in a virtual world, to engagement. It's your relation to them. So what we've got to get you to do is develop a growth mindset.
What's a growth mindset?
Okay, so think of it this way. A growth mindset is one in which you see challenges as new opportunities for learning, all right? Because the cutting edge of your learning, of everybody's learning, is when we make a mistake. Imagine when you were young. Did you learn to ride a bike?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so, and did you fall off that bike?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, quite a few times, but you kept getting back on, didn't you? And you were scaffolded along the way and people gave you advice, mums and dads, about, keep your bike straight or sit on the saddle at this angle. So you had little tips and techniques and you tried, you fell off, you got back on, you tried, you fell off. So trial and error is key with your learning. And you're going to make mistakes. But in a growth mindset, we're going to relish those mistakes as new learning. If you have a fixed mindset, you avoid anything that's new and you stay in your little bubble away from it. So you feel confident, but actually you're overwhelmed in another way because everybody's moving on. So let's accept those challenges and let's tell ourselves, let's use a really good word that we keep in our mind, the word yet. I haven't learnt to do that yet. Okay? What do you do when your children make mistakes in class?
We talk about what it is that makes either them think it was a mistake, or what's made me think the same thing, or what choices they made that got them to that point, what they could do differently to create a different outcome next time.
Okay. And do all children make the same mistakes?
No.
Okay, so of course they don't, because you're dealing with individual people. Do you think all your colleagues are finding it as difficult as you are?
I think certainly some, yeah.
And do you think you're all finding the same thing difficult?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, so acknowledge that we're in this together. That's the first thing. We're in this together. We're in this trial error where we're going to all learn to develop. It's just happened at a very, we're being asked to be Zoom ninjas overnight. We've got to do it very quickly, okay? So that's the first thing. Now, I'm going to teach you a new technique. And the technique I want you to learn is I want you to start developing a growth mindset by thinking, let's start with a lesson that you've taught in the virtual world. Tell me one.
We did a lesson on contrast in fairy tales. So we looked at similarities and differences between two different fairy tales.
Okay. And what went well in that lesson?
I was able to tell the story well and use all the different characters' voices, make sure the purpose of the story, the arc of the story, and the characters were clear.
Okay. And what didn't go so well that you were unhappy with?
I found that the children got fidgety a lot earlier than they normally would in our regular classroom.
All right, so I'm going to teach you a little technique, really quick technique. It's called amplify and learn. Now you've just told me, so what went well in the lesson?
The storytelling and the use of voices for different characters.
Right, so we can take the voice bit out of that. We can think the way I used the voice to switch up the learning, I can take to other lessons. That's the amplify bit. And you could, I'm sure there were lots of other good things that you could pick. So you work out what were the good bits. Now, what can we learn from what didn't go so well?
That they got restless quicker than usual, so they were a bit fidgety
All
earlier
right.
on.
Okay, so let's take that. We're going to learn from it. So one of the things that we need to think about is we all get quite fidgety, don't we? Concentrating for long periods of time, it's quite difficult. So were they sitting for the whole time?
They were, yeah.
All right. So we want to learn from that, because the younger the children are, the less, the more fidgety they are and the more difficult it is to sit still. Would you have had them sitting still in a classroom?
No.
Okay. So they could get off their seats. You don't have to have them. So we're going to learn from it. They didn't like sitting there. They liked the story, but they didn't like sitting there. So let's get them off their seats. Perhaps they're going to be one of the characters in the story. Perhaps they're going to get an object that they're going to bring to when you're talking about the story as an aid memoir to the story. Perhaps they're going to do call and response. But we're going to think about the thing that went wrong and we're going to learn from it. So when you plan your next lesson, what I want you to do is I want you to start with, to learn this technique. Let's start small. I want you to amplify, think the tone went well. I'm going to think about the tone in my next lesson and how I'm going to make good use of that. And we're going to learn from what didn't go well. They didn't like sitting down so long, so I'm going to chunk the lesson up. So whatever the lesson is I'm going to teach, I'm going to chunk it up in smaller pieces of time so that they are more active and engaged in their learning. And from that way, this trial and error will improve and you'll be able to share with your colleagues. Has that helped?
It definitely has, thank you.